All right, so good afternoon, everybody, and hope everybody's doing well. The weather's getting lovely. It's warming up finally. What are we today? June 10th today. So summer is just beginning. We'll start our meeting today with the any amendments to the agenda. So is there anything that anyone would like to add or change? Seeing none. So we would normally move on to the adoption of the minutes at this time. However, due to the nature of this meeting, we are going to defer that and adopt those minutes at our next meeting. So we don't have that to deal with today. We don't have any delegations listed in the agenda and don't have any correspondence items either listed. We will move into our priority issues now, and we will call on CAO Malcolm Morris to discuss the Beckwith Street crosswalk. Just before we begin that, I think we had skipped over the disclosures of conflicts of interest. Is there anything that anyone would like to disclose? No, seeing none. None? Okay. So we will now apologize for that little omission there, but now we will call on CAO Morris to discuss the Beckwith Street crosswalks priority issue. So, CAO.
Great, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to all for meeting as a special meeting today. Today is all about Beckwith Street, so we have a couple of important discussions we want to engage you in, and the first one relates to the phase 1 work that we all know was primarily completed last fall, but not completely finished. We ran out of good weather. So we're going back to clean up a few items shortly, we hope. I would like to note that we have James Fuchs with us from Morrison Hershfield. Morrison is, Hershfield is our consultant on the phase 2 work. So you may recall that we had a different consultant on the phase 1 work. And their name, the name of that firm was Parsons. So what we want to talk about today is really a continuation of the discussion that Director Dunlop had started back on at your March 24th meeting. I think that was your inaugural meeting. And what Troy had brought forward was a discussion on the crosswalks that are to be installed on phase 1 of Beckwith. So as many of you may know, Mr. Dunlop's no longer with the town, so I'm filling in for him on this file. So I'm delighted to be here today to have this discussion. So what Troy had talked about, just to jog your memories, was that the initial design for Beckwith called for what's called a stamped concrete finish on the crosswalks. So the crosswalks are those areas where pedestrians and cyclists can cross the street perpendicular to the flow of traffic. So what we had in the original design was this stamped concrete, which is what they do. James can explain it a little bit better, but essentially they just pour concrete and they pour it in a different way so that they put a stamp in it and it gives it a textured finish. So aesthetically, they look pretty good. But we're here to talk about some issues that James and his team have brought to our attention. And that's why we want to have this conversation today. So, so what we're going to talk about are kind of the technical aspects and the durability aspects of crosswalks. And then we'll talk about the options that are available to the town, and that's where we want to get your perspective. So what we're going to propose are basically 4 options. The first one would be to forge ahead with the stamped concrete according to the original design. The second option would be to look at a more traditional concrete finish. We call that a brushed concrete finish to give it some friction, some traction on concrete. The third option is essentially a variation of that where a pattern can be put in the concrete, typically done through a sandblasting approach to provide some texture to the crosswalk. And then the fourth option is to not pour concrete, but to simply put pavement markings on the crosswalks to delineate where pedestrians and cyclists would cross. So with that in mind, let's start with the first part of the discussion about why we're even considering something other than the stamped concrete. And I would point out this is a discussion we have not had with council yet. We wanted to run it by this group first and then bring something forward to council after that. So any questions so far? No? Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to James and he can walk us through some of the technical considerations for stamped concrete.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me at your meeting. I hope you can all hear me okay. Any issues, just let me know. I'm James Fuchs, and I'm the project manager for the Beckwith Street Phase 2 project with Morrison Hushfield. I'm in Ottawa. So maybe just to start out with why concrete crosswalks were proposed at all, as opposed to just painted markings on the asphalt. I think there are 2 different reasons for including concrete crosswalks in phase 1. One is the aesthetics and trying to create an appropriate aesthetic for a pedestrian-friendly main street of Smiths Falls. So it brings that difference in surface finish for the crosswalks, brings that higher end aesthetic, and also helps to make it very clear to motorists that the crosswalks are different from the rest of the road, something for motorists to be aware of. The use of concrete for the crosswalks also helps to provide that difference in texture and color for the crosswalks to help pedestrians and especially in terms of accessibility, to help provide that difference of texture and color to help guide people to the appropriate place to cross the road. Now, the stamped concrete that was proposed, as Malcolm mentioned, is created by pouring the wet concrete and then pressing a stamp into that, which could have a pattern, a customized pattern or any type of pattern on it. But the result of that, as well as the pattern, you end up with the finish of the stamp. So the stamp is typically a smooth surface, and you're pressing a smooth surface onto the concrete. So you end up with very smooth concrete, much smoother than the normal finish of a sidewalk. The problem, obviously, with that smooth surface is an increased risk of slipping, basically, in wet conditions, icy conditions, and so on. Malcolm also mentioned the durability. We've tended to find, due to the sort of the mechanics of what happens when you press that stamp into the concrete, you can end up with a layer of very fine, almost cement dust on the surface, which seems to allow it seems to impact the long-term strength of the surface of the concrete, and it can lead to faster degradation of the surface of the concrete unless it's regularly protected with a sealer or coating, which is obviously ongoing maintenance requirement for the town. And if it isn't done, it can lead to those crossworks breaking up or breaking down, degrading sooner than they would if they were a simple concrete finish similar to a sidewalk. Also to note that when that sealer or coating is applied, it too can create an even smoother, more slippy finish. So our reasons for not recommending the use of the stamped concrete is twofold. It's the reduced surface traction, or the increased risk of creating a slippery surface, and it's the poorer durability compared to non-stamped concrete. And those are the reasons why we're suggesting some alternative approaches.
Okay, thanks, James. Any questions about James' his technical analysis? No? Okay. So I believe at the last meeting when this was discussed, there were questions about examples. So we have examples for you today. So if you bear with me, I will just share my screen and we'll go through a short presentation. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, good. Okay, so so James, perhaps I'll ask you to walk us through. Some of these are technical kind of diagrams, but we have some photos as well that we can show you.
Yeah, and I'll try to stick to the four options that you outlined here. So the first option you outlined was to stick with the stamped concrete, which, as I mentioned, is not something that we would recommend. The second option there was a brushed concrete finish. So brushed concrete is simply the standard sidewalk finish. It's concrete which is poured, and then as it's drying, it's lightly swept with a brush perpendicular to the path of travel, and that provides that rough surface that you see on sidewalks, which gives you the best possible surface traction. And as you know, sidewalks are generally provide good grip in wet conditions, and maybe less so when there's ice, but there's not much that we can do about that other than providing good drainage. But it provides the best possible traction. So brushed concrete would look something like this image below here, or this image, sorry, that Malcolm's got on the screen. Now, one sort of sub-option, if you like, of brushed concrete is what you do with the saw cuts. So the saw cuts are those lines across the crosswalk. This is they're installed to prevent it cracking, essentially, because concrete expands and contracts with the temperature, like anything else. So those lines prevent the concrete from cracking as much as possible. But it's possible to vary those. This image is a very sort of straightforward saw cut. But it does convey that sort of understanding that this is a crosswalk with the horizontal bars. I think on the first slide, Malcolm, if you just flip back to it, there was another option that our landscape architect had suggested for more, this one here, for more kind of aesthetic appeal. You could saw cut on the diagonal, and there's a couple of images. If you can just scroll down slightly, Malcolm, there's a couple of images at the bottom there of sort of installations along these lines. this is something that we had drawn up, or a landscape architect had drawn up to show what could be done. We're not recommending this type of pattern for Beckwith Street. The concern is that with all of these kind of diagonal lines leading in different directions, it can lead to confusion, particularly for anyone who's visually impaired or has other needs. It could lead to some confusion as to exactly where the crosswalk is going. Better to have straight lines that are either perpendicular or aligned with the path of travel to make it very clear what the alignment of the crosswalk is. So maybe just to clarify here, I think our second option here is brushed concrete with a simple saw cut pattern. So lines perpendicular to the path of travel. Right, our next option, and the one that we are recommending here, is a sandblast finish. There was a slide for this on maybe the first sheet.
Here.
Yeah, so the idea with sandblasting is you pour a standard brushed concrete crosswalk, but then to add some visual interest, again, to contribute to the aesthetic that the town is looking for Beckwith Street, using a template, sections of the concrete are sandblasted, which removes some of the finer material. So in terms of surface texture, it actually roughens the surface slightly. It doesn't leave it any smoother. Now, it's possible to sandblast all sorts of intricate patterns, but that wouldn't be appropriate for the roadway because they would get worn down by traffic over time. So if you can just go up slightly, Malcolm, we're suggesting, it's not totally clear here, it hasn't scanned brilliantly, but the idea is that every second panel would be sandblasted. So it's very much a typical crosswalk pattern, the kind of the zebra stripe pattern. But it just will look, it'll just have that slightly elevated visual appearance, which will contribute to the overall aesthetic of the street. And there's no durability impact with this. It's a very minimal amount of material that's being removed. It's just to create a slightly different look on some of those panels. It's a bit like cutting grass. You know, if you cut grass, and you can cut grass with the stripes in different, you can create stripes in your grass by mowing in different directions. It's not changing the grass, it's just changing the appearance of it slightly. Yeah, and this is what we're recommending here. And maybe I'll just cover the final option, which would be no concrete at all, just paving straight across the crosswalks. I don't know if we had yeah, this would be the example. Actually, no, this has concrete. But you can imagine it would be a painted, it would just be a painted crosswalk on asphalt. You know, it's a pretty standard approach. It doesn't add anything to the aesthetic of the street. The disadvantage really of the painted finish is that the paint wears out and needs to be reapplied at least annually. And if you catch it when that paint is in need of being renewed, it may be slightly less clear where the crosswalk is. Also, with the painted crosswalks, there's nothing really to give that extra level of attention to motorists, to make, you know, to encourage motorists to really be aware of pedestrians. There was one other slide in here which had a brick border on it, Malcolm. Maybe I should just comment on that one.
Yes. Okay.
It's the Elgin Street one, I think. We explored a lot of different options for crosswalks. to find something that would help with the aesthetic of the street while achieving the durability, the accessibility, and all the other important objectives for the project. Something that we see done quite frequently is this finish with a brick border on the crosswalks. Unfortunately, we're yet to find an example where this has actually stood up well to long-term traffic, especially on a street like Beckwith where we have heavy truck traffic. There's invariably settlement of the brick border or chipping around the edges and so on, which of course looks terrible and creates trip hazards. So that's why we didn't include anything like this in the options. That kind of summarizes the 4 options. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
So perhaps, Madam Chair, I'll just state that, would you prefer the images be removed?
That would be great if you could, CAO, and I'll just allow me to see the questions a little bit easier.
There we go.
Thank you so much. All right, so we will move on. Corey.
How deep would the cracks be? Like, how far down are they? Will it still make it accessible for people in wheelchairs and walkers, or with a cane?
Just to make sure I understood the question, are you talking about the cuts in the yeah? So those
Yes.
those are exactly the same as the cuts that you see in a sidewalk. Sidewalks are divided into panels by those cuts, so it's exactly the same thing. It's just a narrow cut, and it shouldn't present any.
How many should go in each crosswalk?
On the proposed image there, we had, do we have a dimension there? We had approximately 16 cuts across the crosswalk. So similar to the stripes of a painted crossing.
I think it would be important to state that the expansion or those cuts would need to occur whether it's stamped or not.
They would, if there is a concern, those cuts could be spaced more widely.
That would be my suggestion, space it wider.
On the other hand, one advantage of having more cuts is it does provide the crosswalk with a little more long-term flexibility for the impacts of that truck traffic. So there's the more kind of cuts we have up to a point, the less likely it is to crack. So there's a sweet spot in there, I think. And I think what we're proposing is fairly close. Yeah, sorry, I found the dimension. We were proposing those cuts to be at 1 meter intervals. So they're not too close. It's pretty similar to a sidewalk. I'll just add, as you know, with the sidewalk, the really important thing is if the sidewalk is in good condition. I don't think those lines are very problematic. But once the sidewalk starts to settle and crack, it becomes a big issue. So another part of this is the actual structural design of the crosswalk, and we have a few best practices up our sleeve that we'd be proposing in terms of the reinforcing steel in the crosswalk and how it's constructed that will help to make sure that these are as durable as possible.
Jen.
I just had a question about earlier somebody mentioned that this was for phase 1. Are you talking about redoing the crosswalks that are already there because they're painted, or is this for phase 2 only?
I can answer that, Malcolm, or you
Sure.
can. So phase one, it was paved straight through, always with the intention of coming back and installing the crosswalks at a later date. That was just the construction sequence because of timing of doing things in the fall.
Okay.
So because we are now in the process of finishing up the design of phase two, the town has rightly taken the view that this is a really good opportunity to review the crosswalk design and make sure that we have the same crosswalks in phase one and phase two.
Okay, great. Thanks
So
very much.
it applies to both.
Okay.
So if I may, Madam Chair, just to follow up on that's a great question. So what prompted this, of course, is that the contractor Tomlinson are saying, hey, we're ready to come back and do the crosswalks. And so we said, okay, just hang tight until we decide what we want them to look like, if at all. Okay.
Did I see another? Councillor Allen.
James, I was wondering, as you were explaining things to us, I was wondering if there's been any research or anyone has followed which one is better with wheelchairs. You know, like to me, I've only been in a wheelchair when I broke my ankle, but it was 7 weeks of very difficult getting around town, and bumpy surfaces were almost, even someone pushing me, if I was doing it on my own, it would be next to impossible. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder if one of those things you showed us, if anyone's mentioned that they're the best for wheelchair use, or even walker, because a walker would be the same situation with the wheels.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of specific direct research on that, but we see a lot, you know, there's a lot of accessibility guidance and other public realm design guidance that talks generally to best practices, which is research based, right? So the things that we'd consider there are, yeah, obviously an uneven surface would be challenging for anyone in a wheelchair or using a walker, as you say. Mm-hmm. The only one of these that would present or that could present an uneven surface is stamped concrete. If it was a stamped concrete pattern with, you know, like you see some cobble type stamped concrete finishes, and that's, to be honest, another reason for not recommending stamped concrete. Even an interlock type stamped concrete would be that bit rougher. Right. So that's another reason for not going down that route. Again, the having sufficient surface traction or friction is important, whether you're in a wheelchair or using a walker. So, you know, another reason not to have something too smooth. The others are all very comparable. They're all variations on a standard sidewalk finish. The sandblast doesn't present any really discernible difference in the texture that you would feel. It's just changing the appearance really by exposing some of the aggregate, but the actual surface that you are standing on or the tire of the wheelchair is on isn't really changed. Other than that, obviously, as I mentioned, the durability is really important. Almost any of these would be great on day one. It's making sure that they're great in year 5 and year 10. That's important. And that's why we're not proposing anything like the brick borders or other things that we know don't stand the test of time.
Thank you.
Corey.
Sorry. Malcolm, do you agree with the recommendation, or do you have a different recommendation?
Well, I agree that stamped concrete creates all kinds of issues, both accessible and maintenance. So it's a good opportunity to revisit that decision. Aesthetically, they look great, but practically they're not as good. I mean, the easiest solution, of course, is just not to do anything and paint it. You know, it's smooth, there are no saw cuts. It's, you know, that's the simplest approach
I'd like
by
that.
far, but it does present an ongoing maintenance issue with repainting every year. You know, I think we're trying to find that balance between functionality and aesthetics, and you know, the concrete with the textured surface, I think, does both. The sandblasted surface.
I certainly do think that smoother option is better, just for walking with a walker. But I do think that a slight variation, like coming off the sidewalk and not having just a painted intersection crosswalk, is probably better than just having it painted. It's, you know, just to have that distinction there is good. As long as it's just not high, not too high, just low enough that a walker could, or a wheelchair could easily, you know, make that transition from the sidewalk to the street.
Okay. In terms of costs, and that may not be, you know, a large factor here, but it will be, you know, for council, of course. So the contract that we had with Tomlinson included the stamped concrete crosswalks through the whole phase 1 corridor. So we have reached out to Tomlinson and said, hey, what would the impact be if we did not do this work? So it's about $130,000 to do all the crosswalks in phase 1. So if we don't do them, we would save 130. We have not priced out at this point what the cost would be for a broom finish, a traditional finish, nor have we costed out, you know, the sandblasted textured finish. James, do you have a sense for what the relative costs would be?
I'm not totally sure about relative to stamped concrete. I'm not too sure about stamped concrete pricing, but I do know that the premium for, well, obviously a broom finish is the simplest and cheapest standard concrete finish. So that's your base. The premium for sandblasting is minimal. It's a guy coming out in a van for a day and doing them all. So it's a few $1,000s maybe for all of them, compared to a much more significant price impact for the stamped concrete. And it's quite possible that this could be done by Tomlinson installing standard broom finish for the phase 1 crosswalks, and then the sandblasting being done on completion of phase 2. They could sandblast all the phase 1 and phase 2 crosswalks at that time, get a consistent finish, and to be honest, it allows another year then to finalize the decision.
Corey.
I'll let Kelly go first, actually. She hasn't talked yet.
Kelly.
The 150,000, I just want to make sure, what was that on the stamp?
Yeah, so to be clear, it was 130,000.
Okay, sorry.
And it was to do the stamped concrete for all the intersections in phase 1. So from Chambers to Russell.
Okay, and what is the sandblast one then? Like what's?
Well, we don't know for sure, but
Okay.
we think it would be comparable, if not somewhat less than stamped.
Right now, as it is, phase 1 is accessible, right? Wheelchair accessible, all right, and it's painted, right? Is that what I'm? is not painted yet.
So that's a great question. I don't think we've painted the crosswalk.
It's not painted yet. No.
No, the bicycle, the cycle tracks are painted. The crosswalks are not. So that's a simple fix. That's just that's a painting solution that would be quickly done and relatively inexpensive.
Okay, I'm just the money threw me off how much it is.
Yeah, it's not insignificant, to be sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But you know, we do need to look at this in the long term. You know, it's going to be there for a long time, so we want to make sure it's durable and serves the accessibility needs of the community, and so that's why we didn't lead with the cost. We want to get the right surface and then work it.
I don't believe the stamp is the right one or painting it, because the stuff right now from phase 1 is coming off in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, has only been a year.
Yeah, it's a lot of traffic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Corey.
When is construction for phase 2 expected to begin?
Well, we have a few steps before we get to the construction phase. In fact, the next item on your agenda is about phase 2, so we need to make a few decisions and help council make a few decisions on the gateway feature and things like that. So James and his team are finalizing the design. Once we get further direction from council, then we'll be ready to go to tender, and then council will need to make a decision. The project, I should point out, has not been funded in 2021 rather. We did get provincial funding, which was a huge amount, 1.9 million, but we need a lot more money that has not yet been allocated to the project. So, so it could start this fall if council wishes to proceed at that rate, but we have a few things to finish before we can go to tender.
I have one follow-up to that. The construction on Lombard and Abbott will be done then before the construction starts on Beckwith?
Correct.
They won't go at the same time?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further? Councillor Allen.
Just a thank you for sharing that we're going to do them the same, because as I was listening, Malcolm, I was concerned that half of the street would be one way and the other half, and I thought that what a mistake that would be, you know. So I'm relieved to know that we'll have it all the same.
Mm-hmm. Consistency is important. Okay.
Yeah, so we wanted to have this discussion and get a direction from council before we cut any asphalt and put any concrete in place. For sure. Okay.
All right.
So at this point, I guess what we're looking for is consensus, ideally, but even some direction that council could consider when we make this decision.
All right, Councillor Allen.
I have one other question in terms of accessibility committee and your discussion with us. When Troy explained the other crosswalk, how it's set, it's going to have a noise. I forget the length of time, but there's a certain length of time where there'll be a noise that will allow someone that's visually impaired to get across the street. That hasn't been mentioned, but I assume that's all part of this. Am I correct, James?
Yes, the traffic signals will be, well, just to follow up on the conversation we just had, although we're a different consultant, we're very aware of the need to provide consistency between phase 1 and phase 2, and everything will be visually consistent, same traffic signals, same street lights and so on. And yes, absolutely the same accessibility or AODA design standards are being followed for the traffic signals.
That's great, thank you.
Nadine.
Lucy, I was just going to offer that the committee, if the committee is supportive of any of the recommendations, you could conduct a straw vote to see how everybody's feeling and get a feel. Or as Malcolm says, if there's no recommendation, any input at all would be helpful for staff when they bring it forward to council.
Okay.
So just might help with the conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. So do we want to conduct a vote then? Oh, Jen.
I'm sorry, if you're conducting a vote, then that's we can do that. Sorry, I was just going to say that I'm in favor of the recommendation that's been put forth for the sandblasted from an accessibility point of view.
Is maybe I'll go through each person and we can vote that way, just so that I'm sure I don't miss anyone. So I'll start at the top of my screen. So I'll start with Corey.
I'm going to vote in favor of the recommendation for the sandblast.
Okay. We'll go to Councillor Allen now.
Yes, I agree. I'm in favor of that as well.
Okay. Kelly?
Me too. I'm in favor of it.
Jen?
Sorry, yes, I'm in favor as well.
Katie?
Yes, I think it'll be visually attractive and it sounds safe. So I'm for that too.
Okay, perfect. And Councillor McGuire at the bottom. Perfect. So I think that's our option. I think that's what the committee is supportive of. So wherever that needs to go from there, Nadine.
Sorry, just procedurally, can we have an emotion so someone would first and move it and second it, and
Sure.
then we'll just have that supported, okay? So if you don't mind doing that, I'll put it in the minutes.
All right, so could I have someone make that motion, please? Kelly, thank you. And could I have someone second her, please? Corey, thank you. We'll put that recommendation forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I want to thank CAO Morris and James Fuchs for that wonderful presentation and some great information in there, and really helped us to make our recommendations. So thank you, gentlemen.
Great, thank you. But we're not leaving. We want to move up street and talk about phase 2 now.
Yes, our next priority issue is the Beckwith Street revitalization phase 2, and CAO and James are also going to speak to that issue. So,
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll just do a brief intro to this. This was a discussion that your committee had on May 5th. Again, Director Dunlop brought this forward, and in more of a informative way, to say we were going out for public input and to encourage the committee to contribute through Speak Up Smiths Falls. So that work has, the public engagement concluded. We didn't get the robust response we were hoping to on phase 2, but we did get some input. So James has combed through that input and made a presentation actually earlier this week to Committee of the Whole to get some direction from Council on a few of the key features for phase 2. So one of the things committee thought would be very important was to weigh in with this committee and get some thoughts and opinions on some of the features in phase 2. So that's why we're here. And I'll turn it over to James, and he can walk through the decision points that we're looking for input from this group to help Council make a decision.
Thank you, Malcolm. Do you have my slides from committee?
I do not.
Yeah.
Or if
Dave
not,
does.
Dave has them ready, yeah.
okay, great. was going to say otherwise I can share them. I won't go through everything. We'll focus on, Malcolm, I understand the intent is to focus on the Elmsley intersection.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So let's just go through a few more slides. Let's go next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so this just provides an overall layout of phase 2 from Russell Street on the right-hand side of the plan up to Elmsley Street on the left side of the plan. The roadway cross-section that's proposed is, to all intents and purposes, the same as phase 1, just tweaked where necessary to match the local conditions. So we'll focus on the intersection with Elmsley Street on the left-hand side of the drawing, and I have a larger drawing of this in a moment. But I think this one gives the overall context. So right now, it's a fairly wide roadway at this intersection, and there is what we're calling a free flow right turn lane from Elmsley Street into Beckwith Street. So as you're coming eastbound on Elmsley Street, there's that lane that carries motorists around into Beckwith Street. And then there's an island for pedestrians who are crossing the road. One of the main objectives of this project is to transform Beckwith Street into a more pedestrian and cyclist-focused street. And a key component of that is the intersection with Elmsley Street. So the proposed design removes that free flow right turn and brings that traffic through the main part of the intersection instead, which allows us to narrow down the roadway at that entrance, that northern entrance to this portion of Beckwith Street, which will make it visually, it'll provide that compelling visual message to motorists that they're entering a different type of street, and it's time to slow down, it's time to look out for pedestrians, it's time to take care of cyclists and so on. Maybe if we can go through, I think, 2 more slides. Yeah, let's stick on this slide for a moment. So just before we get to the details of the layout, we did post, or these plans were posted for public consultation on the Speak Up Smiths Falls website. There were a number of comments received in relation to this issue. There were 4 commenters who requested that this southbound free flow right turn lane from Elmsley to Beckwith not be removed. People were concerned about impacts to traffic. And there was 1 comment expressing support for the removal of that lane. So basically expressing support for the proposed design. And the reason they gave was near misses that have been experienced by pedestrians. If we can go forward, I think 2 more slides, there's a plan which will help to explain this, and then I'll come back to the advantages and disadvantages. So on this plan, you can see in some detail the proposed layout. So right now, you may be able to see in the faint gray lines is the existing layout. Right now, pedestrians have to cross out to that island, and then if we just go back, can we just go back to the last slide? Yeah, pedestrians cross out to that island, and then from there they can access the crosswalks to get across the intersection. The proposed design does away with the island and enables pedestrians to cross directly in one movement. And this is all traffic signal controlled. So you wait for the traffic signal and then you cross. There's some changes to the sidewalk layout, or not so much changes, but because of the narrowing of the roadway, the sidewalk moves. But we're able to create that diagonal straight piece of sidewalk, which provides a direct path of travel for pedestrians coming north on Beckwith Street and heading for the crosswalk to continue north. That area that's created, that's kind of regained from the roadway, is one of two locations that's being considered for a gateway feature, which would be a landscaping feature, and there's various themes and forms that have been considered for that and are still under consideration by the town. Now, if we can go back to the last slide, I'll just run through the issue. So we presented previously to council in February, and at that meeting, we were asked to look in more detail at the pros and cons of the proposed design, or of retaining the current configuration with the free flow right turn lane. And in particular, we were asked to complete some traffic analysis modeling to work out what the impact would be to drivers. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the screen here with the proposed design of removing the free flow right turn. So the advantages of that are that it enables this more pedestrian and cycling friendly environment to be created. The two-stage crosswalk with the existing configuration is inherently less accessible and less safe for pedestrians. You have to cross that free flow right turn, which can have traffic coming around it fairly fast. And then you have to navigate the island to get to the correct crosswalk, which is obviously a fairly dangerous environment. You're on a small island in the middle of a road, particularly for those with visual impairments. You've got to find the right crosswalk and continue from there, particularly kind of in winter conditions when there's snow on the ground and so on. The proposed design removing the free flow right turn promotes traffic calming, because drivers do need to slow down and stop and wait at the traffic signal before turning. It's proposed that a right turn on red would be allowed, but it's still, drivers are still required to slow down and pay attention to the surroundings. There's improvements for access to the commercial plaza on the corner there at 94 Beckwith. The outcome of the traffic modeling was that this would actually cause no perceptible increase in delay for drivers, even at peak times of day. The one proviso for that is that the right turn on red needs to be permitted for there to be no increase in delay for drivers. And this design creates boulevard space, which could be repurposed for that gateway feature, which would frame that entrance to this section of Beckwith Street. The one thing I've identified as a disadvantage is that the full benefits to pedestrians would only be realized if right turn on red is prohibited. So if drivers are not allowed to make the right turn from Elmsley to Beckwith at a red light. However, the traffic modeling indicated that with the traffic volumes using this roadway, that would result in some delays at peak times. And that's why we're proposing this compromise solution of removing the free flow right turn, but allowing the right turn on red. The notes, the advantages and disadvantages listed on the left of the screen here, with retaining the free flow right turn, are basically counter to those for the proposed option. Only other advantages here of retaining it are less chance of confusion associated with change. The current design is a smoother turn for drivers and trucks. And again, I would stress that our objective here, as instructed by the town was to create a pedestrian and cycling friendly environment. Had the direction been to create an environment that is that prioritizes vehicular traffic, we might be making a different recommendation. Yeah, and specific disadvantages for retaining the current configuration with the free flow right turn is that it's particularly dangerous for cyclists who are trying to continue straight through on Elmsley or straight through on Beckwith, because they need to cross that right turn lane. So there's a potential conflict between cyclists and drivers. Maybe if we just go to the next slide again, and then I'll wrap up on this slide. So again, this is the proposed layout, removing the free flow right. Based on traffic modeling, the average impact to traffic delay is not going to be noticeable to road users even during peak times. And this is our recommendation, considering that desire to create a more pedestrian and cycling friendly intersection that frames the gateway to Beckwith Street, or the renovated portion of Beckwith Street, and really sets the theme for the street. So I guess council from the meeting on Monday, committee of the whole, had requested this committee's input on the preferred option. So again, happy to answer any questions and discuss further.
All right. Could I just have Dave there? Thank you. And now I can see, I can take questions if there are any. Jen.
I was just wondering, I've used that intersection quite a lot, and crossing from where that plaza is at 94 Beckwith Street to the little island, it was difficult as somebody like standing upright. And I was wondering if there was any thoughts as to if it would be even more impactful to somebody in a wheelchair who would be not as tall as obviously somebody who is standing.
And Sale or James?
I believe it would be, but I'd be very interested on the opinions of this committee on that. I mean, certainly my opinion would be, yes, it's difficult to make that crossing. There's not the best sight line for seeing cars coming around the corner. You do have people coming fairly fast around there. And yeah, you know, to make that crossing, you need to be able to move fairly quickly across that road. So that's one of the reasons why we're really not recommending that. If we were to take that approach of keeping the free flow right turn, there are things we could do to mitigate that. We could install signage. In fact, on a free flow right like that, where there's a marked crossing, drivers are required to stop for pedestrians, but not everyone knows that. So we can put up the appropriate signage to remind drivers, or we can put in PXO or pedestrian crossover signage, which makes it very clear.
Councillor McGuire.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks a lot, James, for coming and bringing this to us today. I'm wondering the committee's opinion on the PXO idea, because I think it might be a great compromise between the two. But I also, like Jen, really interested in what that island's like for lived experience. I know from just the bike experience isn't exactly relevant to this committee, but right now it's a pretty good setup, because the way those white lines kind of Y out around the island, if you're going to do the right turn, you just keep it tight. But if you're going to go straight, you've got that little pocket created by the white lines that keep the cars away from the island. And there's a little place where you can rest there. Whereas now, with the way it's set up, there's nothing at that intersection. It's just going into a standard intersection with the straight left and the right turn. And there's nowhere to really go on your bike. But anyway, I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think of the accessibility side of it.
All right, Corey.
I have a question for Councillor McGuire, actually. Has this been brought forward to the police service board? Do you know?
No, we don't generally discuss construction layouts or this kind of thing there.
Okay, I'm just wondering, for emergency vehicles, the free flow lane gives ambulances, police, and fire the ability to get to calls quicker. If you're at a red light and cars are lined up, how do emergency vehicles get to their calls in a timely manner?
So I would note that there is still proposed to be a dedicated right turn lane leading up to the stop bar. So, and right turn on red is still proposed to be allowed. So it's essentially similar to the current situation. Like right now, anyone using that free flow right needs to wait at the end of that lane for a safe opportunity to join Beckwith Street. With the proposed design, vehicles can make that turn again as soon as there's a safe opportunity to turn. So that's similar to the modeling which has showed no noticeable impact to drivers. Essentially the same thing for emergency services. The cars are able to make that turn. They don't have to wait for the light to change. And there is a dedicated line there. So you're not waiting behind a dedicated lane, sorry. You're not waiting behind people who are going straight through.
I know I probably wouldn't even endeavor that. I don't think I could get across quick enough, so I know that wouldn't be too easy to do. I think anybody that's relies on the use of a wheelchair or walker would probably have difficulty with that as well. Just traveling fast enough to get across safely. But, just another thought too. Jen.
I just wanted to voice my opinion that I'm for the recommendation, including the allowing the red, to right-hand turning on a red, because that will mitigate the delays. It'll make sure that the emergency vehicles have a space to get through, and also removing the free flowing is really a lot better from an accessibility standpoint. The visibility at that corner is really terrible. Like the houses are right up against the road when to the, I guess, the north of, when you're trying to cross to that island. So it's really difficult to see. So I think I'm really for this recommendation.
Good. All right, did I see another couple of, Corey?
So I got a message from someone after the meeting was told that it's being brought up here. This person works with people with disabilities in the community, and he's suggesting that we keep the free flowing lane. And he says that if you put, I think it's what you guys suggested, the light flashing when people are crossing, it'll make it safer for walking across, or put it at the library and people with disabilities would cross at that crosswalk instead of Elmsley's. And for transport drivers, I don't think a right turn lane would benefit them really. I think the free flowing lane helps them a lot getting downtown. Same with tourists. You don't want to make it so that people aren't going to the downtown. I think if you put the right turn lane in, you're going to get people going straight through and not going downtown.
Good point.
Okay.
Katie.
Okay.
Katie, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm torn between being a driver because that right turn lane is wonderful and quick and everything else. But when I think of us walking, trying to get across the street, which I have never done at that corner, I can't imagine it. So I'm in favor also, but I think that it's not going to be popular. But I think if we use the media to explain seriously why this is being done, I think it'll be understood better.
James, did you have something you wanted to add there before?
Thanks. I was just going to point out in terms of the transport trucks that the geometry of the proposed design geometry is set up to accommodate the large trucks that use this road. That's why it's a shallower curve than a typical intersection. So we have designed this so that the trucks can still get around the intersection. Otherwise, we would have tightened it up more.
And did I see Kelly?
Well, I have a thing with Beckwith Street because I've lived at 177, 121, and now I live at 18 Beckwith. So, so when I lived at 177 and came in through that intersection, that right-hand lane, people were always coming up beside you and driving. The two of us were going down Beckwith Street. I do believe that it should be there, but it definitely needs a red light or something, not a yield sign, because no one yields. There's I'm surprised there hasn't been accidents there. And I agree with Jen with the visibility for them coming around Mach 150, literally, and time to get through for a crosswalk and stuff. I do think we should keep it, but there definitely should be a red light or something, because no one obeys the yield sign right now at all. So I'm in favor for it, to keep it and everything, but we need to make aware of
To clarify that, Kelly, do you mean
people need to stop?
Do you mean putting one in that's at Victoria Parks, that intersection where it only goes off when someone presses?
Coming up Elmsley and turning that right turn on Beckwith.
Yeah, but do you mean just put a light there that only pedestrians can make it go red?
No, well, just for traffic needs to stop before, not a yield. They need to stop and let the other traffic go, and they just go through. They don't yield. So you're having two people going down Beckwith Street at the same time.
Yeah.
See what you're saying? Yeah.
It's really bad. I've lived there 177 and 121. So I'm coming up from 177 and 121, and I'm going through the green light at the intersection, and then you got somebody coming from Elmsley Street on the right curb, and they're coming up beside me. Yeah. We're going at the same time. Because they don't yield. Yeah. They do not yield. I'm just saying there should be something that makes them stop there, not yield.
Just Sam Morris.
Yeah, so on that, the only way to make them stop is to remove the free flow lane.
Yep.
Okay.
Because the very nature of a free flow is they're legally obliged to stop for a pedestrian. But I think we've all observed that, there's usually a speed factor happening.
You can't put a stop sign there as
James,
the yield isn't working.
I'd have to check the details of that, but it's then not a free flow lane, and I'm at that point I struggle to see the advantage of that compared to the proposed design, which sort of makes it the proposed design makes it very clear to drivers what they need to do. It's a standard signalized intersection, so that you stop, you check, if it's clear, you can make the turn.
Okay. Thank you.
Jen.
This is just based on something that Katie had said, that she has never walked across that intersection. From an accessibility standpoint, I think that if anybody hasn't crossed that intersection on foot, it might be good to try to go from the sort of Glen Avenue area over to the library and just see what it feels like to be there in person, and just how quick everything is and the traffic and whatnot. I think it might be good to give people a sort of idea of what it's actually like.
Yeah, I think a real world example does really, help to visualize the issues and any proposed changes. That's a good point. Did I see another hand anywhere? Councillor McGuire. You're on mute, Councillor.
Thanks. We had a question at council on Monday night about the angle of the intersection. It's like a small piece of pie, so you're going to be looking behind your shoulder to try to do that right on red potentially. And I'm wondering if we figured out if right on red is going to be feasible with the visibility, just with Jen and Kelly bringing it up.
We've been looking into that. We'll be sending some more information over to staff. Right now, the sight line is obstructed to some extent by it's by the SO sign and by the shrubs around that sign. Just looking back at some slightly older pictures, it's very clear that those shrubs didn't used to be that tall. They need a good pruning, and that makes a huge difference. Our conclusion is that it is safe and it can be supported with some tidy up of the shrubs, and possibly we'd be making a recommendation about adjusting the sign as well, but that's not a critical component. It's something that would be a recommendation.
So the town own the land the sign is on and the shrubs are on, or is that private property?
It's something we need to get some confirmation on from the town. The mapping that we have shows that the sign half on the private property, half not. The shrubs similar. Something we'd need to confirm. Our survey didn't quite extend up to that sign either, so something to work out the details of. There is a site triangle, but it's not. Things don't seem to quite line up at the moment.
Is there anything else? Corey?
Did you make the straight through lane back up some farther than the right turn lane if we went with that option, so that the cars would not be in the way then when you're looking? If that makes sense. Like put them back a foot?
It's a possibility, and it's actually not something we considered, but it's something we can take away and look at.
Okay. Okay, so I think we can. Nadine, do we want to have a vote today on that, or?
If the committee is actually making a formal recommendation to council at this point in time, I think that we should formalize it by a motion. So if you are supportive of the the right-hand turn recommendation, then you could vote on that with a mover and seconder. Or you could just, provide input if there's no firm directive at this point.
Okay. Well, why don't we defer that and just say that there's no firm input at this time, and then that would allow for the committee to perhaps go and try that out and get a better idea of how that goes, if that's okay.
So Chair Bingley, on that, are you recommending that council members go and walk it, or just the committee members here walk it? Just
anybody, committee members here, and then we can perhaps make a recommendation at a later date, or would that be feasible? Say, Morris.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I think we want you to, have all the information and the time to make the right decision. We just need to overlay that with the need to move the project forward. Having said that, James will be coming to our Traffic and Transportation Advisory Committee. I think it's next week to have a similar discussion. So there is a little bit of time. So my question would be, when is your next meeting? And that might tell us whether timing will line up for this item.
Okay. And Dean.
So Chair Bingley and I had thrown some dates around to propose to the group. However, if it's something that, we need a decision on, certainly we can call another meeting next week if that's what the committee, if committee members are available.
Sure. Is there any feedback from the committee as to what they would like?
Councillor Allen has a question.
Councillor Allen.
Just a comment. We were going to, I know we were going to on our agenda go forward and discuss, and it's going to take some time to do that, I think, the work plan. So I'm just thinking that perhaps if we had a meeting next week for the work plan, we could discuss this one thing that we're struggling with, and would give us a chance to go and walk that area and do some thinking. And then we could then revisit this, because as CAO Morris says, we do have a little time, and that would be a week to, give it some thought and just think about that before we actually make a recommendation. That's just an idea.
Yeah, that's good.
What does anyone have any, Corey?
My only recommendation, if we do a meeting next week, would be not to have it on Wednesday, not the 16th.
Not the 16th. Okey-doke. We will make note of that. Kelly.
Now that we can open tomorrow, thank God. Can we have a later meeting? Like, I'm open till 5.
Okay. Is that
I'm good any day. I'm open until 5.
We can have that discussion, yeah. Jen.
As far as next week goes and a later meeting, the only evening I'm not available is Tuesday. Everything else is open though.
Okay.
How about Thursday?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's a volunteer event that many of us will be going to, so I don't think that's a good day.
Oh.
It's 6, right?
Yeah.
Monday then.
Next week is the 24th. There's an option to have it. I'm just confirming with our IT personnel. We could do it in the morning at 10:30, or if that's or any morning that week, we could do earlier, Kelly, if that worked, or we could do an evening. It's just I'd have to arrange for IT to be here later. So I don't know if a morning meeting would sort of work out, or
5 o'clock.
Or 5 o'clock. I'm just looking. I'll just throw some dates out for everybody, if that's okay, Chair Bingley.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So just throwing out, first of all, is anyone supportive of a morning meeting, or before you go to work? I know Jen has her kids, but we could work around that.
I'm not doing homeschooling anymore. That's done. So okay. I'm open. Basically, they're wandering around the house when I'm on here.
We could start as early as 8:30 or 9, or it's up to you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, with the morning. That's fine. That would probably be better for me.
Okay.
Because when I'm done work, I just want to go home.
So just throwing out some dates, and IT's listening, so if they have any concerns, they could speak up. But Tuesday, June 15th, we could do 8:30 or 9 in there if everyone's available. Okay.
Yep.
I'm okay with that date.
Corey, is that okay with you? I know you have a work schedule as well.
Yeah, that's fine. I can make it work.
Okay. So is 8:30 too early, or should we just say 9? Or
9.
9.
9. Let's not go earlier than 9. Nobody wants to see this earlier than 9.
Well, let's go with 9 o'clock on the 15th then, and I'll book that, and that will give Malcolm, council or the committee can make the decision, and it'll give the CAO sufficient time to have that recommendation for council, if that's okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
And if just to clarify, if anyone is unable to make that meeting or something comes up, if you, Nadine, would it be appropriate to ask them to send their recommendation to you, and then you could
certainly procedurally you need to be present to vote on a matter. However, input is great for staff when they're preparing reports. So if anyone is unable to attend, please let me know your regrets, and we'll share any input with staff that you may have. All the committees brought forward great input today, and certainly staff appreciate that.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we've got our next meeting already settled for the date. Nadine, did we want to discuss the work plan today, or are we gonna do we want to defer that next meeting as well?
I'll leave that to committee members. It may be that you'd like to wait until the next meeting, and it'll be in the morning. Everybody will be fresh with their ideas, and but it's up to the committee members.
Yeah.
I'm going to move a motion to defer priority SUC to next meeting.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Can we second him? Yep, sure. Okay. So we will move that to next meeting then. So I think we can adjourn for today. So we'll do that now, and we again thank Mr. Fuchs and CAO Morris for their wonderful input today, and also, thank everybody for being here and having wonderful, robust conversations. I think on that note, we will adjourn, and so could I have someone make a motion to adjourn? Corey, thank you. And could I have someone second that motion, please? Katie, thank you so much. And that wraps us up for today. So I hope everybody has a great evening, and we will see you on the 15th.
Okay, thanks, Lucy.